The reason I decided to become a digital nomad, it was sort of an accident. You still manage to enjoy your weekends, and in 6 months when I go live in a different city, I'll be able to enjoy my weekends then, but in a different place, with a different culture, with different scenery, with different geography. Don't take yourself too seriously. If the Paul McDougal of 7 years ago was listening to me today, he'd be thinking, what are you talking about? So not everyone knows this. You will in 5 seconds if you're listening. Often it's the small parts of digital nomadism that intimidate people and stop people from making the leap into becoming a digital nomad. If your work is readable and communicates the message and the tone and the style that you're trying to communicate, then don't be afraid to break the rules. What is in danger of happening is, and I didn't want to keep doing that forever.
Hi there, I'm your host Gabe Marushka with the Nomad Solopreneur Show. And before jumping into today's episode, I would like to ask you a small favor. If you enjoyed the episode, can you please review it on your favorite podcast station and make sure to follow to not miss the next one. I really appreciate every single one of you, and thank you so much for supporting the show. Let's jump into today's episode. Hey Paul, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Gabe. How are you?
Pretty good, thanks. I know that you're recording from Georgia. I cannot pronounce the name of the city, but can you do it for me, please?
Now I'm going to feel bad if I pronounce it wrong. Kutaisi. It's Kutaisi, the third biggest city in Georgia.
Nice, beautiful. Saying hi to you from the other side of the world, from Bali. And I think this show was built for the kind of person that you are. I heard that you're hilarious, handsome, and so on. So please tell me more about you.
Well, you're looking at me on a webcam, so I think you can probably see that the handsome thing is a big lie, and the hilarious thing probably is too. But I am Paul McDougal. I'm a travel writer, originally from Newcastle in England. Been a digital nomad for about 7 years, 6.5 years. And right now, as you say, I'm in Kutaisi in Georgia. I don't know. What else would you like to know about me? I feel like that's a superficial introduction. What else would you like to know, Gabe?
That's the thing. I didn't even want super long introduction, and I think you nailed it down. And from one man to another, you're handsome, my man. So don't worry about that. And I will see if you're hilarious as well. Speaking of that, I know that you traveled to quite a lot of countries in these 6+ years. And did you encounter any hilarious experiences in your travels?
Oh man, lots. I feel like my travel style these days is quite different to what it used to be. Now, I'm a bit older, Gabe, and I'm a bit more boring. And I place a focus on productivity and exercise and work and having goals that I want to achieve and blah, blah, blah. So these days I travel quite slowly, and I tend to live in one place for between 3 months and 12 months, usually an average of between 6 and 9 months. So these days I just sort of settle down and I live like a normal routine in whatever new city I'm living in. But back in the day when I used to travel, and also when I first started being a digital nomad, because when I first started being a digital nomad, I absolutely prioritized adventures over work. So I would be traveling and then work was something I occasionally did on the side. So from those days I have lots, I don't know about hilarious stories, but just lots of ridiculous stories. So the way I used to travel was the very opposite of what I do now. It was like fast and loose, and I would have no plan, and I'd be completely spontaneous, and I would just get involved with whatever happened. My normal routine would be I would wake up in whatever town or village or city I'd chosen to spend the night in, and then I would hitchhike. You might know that as autostop, depending on your preferred word. And yeah, I would sort of hitchhike, often aimlessly, just I want to head east or west or north or whatever. And I would stand on the road with my thumb out and hitchhike to somewhere and sleep in some stranger's kitchen or some stranger's spare room or whatever. So I feel like those days, my travel style was full of like brilliant, hilarious stories. But these days, my travel style is just full of spending time with my laptop and running and going to the gym. I'm not an exciting man anymore, Gabe. I'm not fun.
You need to get back to that old travel style.
Well, I do. It's funny, you see, because like the reason I decided to become a digital nomad, it was sort of an accident. I've been spending the vast majority of my time traveling for the last 10 years. And the reason I started working remotely is because I wanted to find a job that I could do while I was traveling so that I could just have a life of perpetual, constant, full-time travel, if that makes sense. But I feel like I've almost sort of come full circle now. And I still love experiencing new places and new cultures and new cities and new mountains and all that sort of stuff. But my routine is more important now. So it's sort of ironic in a way. Like the reason I decided to become a digital nomad is because I wanted a life of constant adventure. But I no longer want a life of constant adventure, if that makes like everything becomes tiring eventually, doesn't it?
I can definitely relate to that. And I end up in a point that I want stability. I want to stay longer in one place, even that I used to slow travel, even from the beginning. My first long destination was Bali, and I spent 9 months here, and was so fulfilling because I can have a routine in place. I still can explore the place around me and so on. But after that, I start to move quite fast for a bit. Then pandemic hit, and again slow travel and so forth. And yeah, I think I arrive at the same point where you are. And both for me, for yourself, and for those in this situation, I would like to know if there is a solution, in your opinion, to still mix those adventures with stability and be able to basically continue to embrace the life that we choose.
I think what is the key here? I think the key is finding a schedule that works for you. And I mean that in sort of in two ways. So, for example, like finding a weekly schedule. If you don't designate times when you absolutely are working and absolutely aren't working, what is in danger of happening is if you're freelance, then you could just work constantly and you could work 7 days a week and you never give yourself any time off. So I'm very strict with myself that I don't work weekends. I never work weekends. Even if a client wants me to work a weekend, I'm just not going to do it. So that means that even if my Monday to Friday is boring and is just work and normal routine and shopping and etc., it means that every Saturday and every Sunday I get to explore the new place that I'm in. So right now, as we said, I'm in Taisi, and Taisi is surrounded by mountains and hills and villages and lakes and lots of outdoor adventures. So every Saturday and Sunday I get to explore different parts of the surroundings of the city that I'm in. So I think that's a nice way to achieve a balance. Like you still manage to enjoy your weekends. And in 6 months, when I go live in a different city, I'll be able to enjoy my weekends then, but in a different place, with a different culture, with different scenery, with different geography, etc., etc. And I also think that you have to develop a long-term strategy that works for you. So I think I would say I maybe have more hobbies than the average person. So I like to do lots of hiking and cycling, and I like to go to the gym, I like to run, I like to read a lot. And I think if you have a full-time work schedule and you have lots of hobbies that you like to enjoy, if you're only going to stay in a place for 1 month, you're not really going to get much time to explore that place. So one of the reasons I like to spend a long time in one city is because it allows me to work full-time and do my hobbies and explore the new place that I'm in. And I think a lot of digital nomads move too quickly. And I think the reason lots of digital nomads move quickly is because they feel like if I move quickly, I get to see lots of places in a short amount of time. But I feel like actually, ironically, the opposite is true. If you move too quickly, what ends up happening is you spend a lot of your time on aeroplanes or on buses or on trains or looking for Airbnbs or like sourcing out these things all the time and doing life admin all the time so that you don't have any free time anymore. So in the month that you're in that place, you don't actually have time to explore that place. So I think it's about finding a schedule and a structure that works for you. I think that's the key to getting a balance between work and adventure. Has that answered your question, or have I just
Yeah,
rambled on for
definitely.
5 minutes and said nothing? I'm not sure.
No, you definitely answered my question and gave me some ideas as well to apply. And my only roadblock that I can foresee here is the limit of the visa that you can get in different places. So I assume that you choose places based on the availability to stay there for longer time, or how do you go about the place that you actually choose to live in?
I feel like as I'm more experienced in digital nomadism, what a horrible term, I feel like I've got a better handle on the things that are important to me. So the three things I look for, I would say, four things actually. A city that has mountains, a city that isn't too big. Like I'm just tired of big cities now. A city that is relatively affordable. It doesn't have to be super cheap, but relatively affordable. And like you've just said, a place where I can stay long term, either with an easy to obtain visa or no visa. So I think if a place ticks all 4 of those boxes, it's a place I'll think, okay, I might live there. And for me, that is one of the big things about Georgia. So not everyone knows this. You will in 5 seconds if you're listening. A lot of nationalities can come to Georgia for 1 year with no visa. So you can just arrive at the airport and they give you a stamp in your passport and you can stay for an entire year. And then if you want to re-enter, you can just like leave, go to Armenia or Azerbaijan for an hour or Turkey for an hour and then come back and you get another year. For now, at least, it's super, super easy to stay in Georgia long term. And for me, that's one of the really appealing things about here.
I had no idea, and I'm not even sure if it's part of Asia or European Union. Shame on me, I know.
No, because no one really knows this, Gabe. Like, I actually, ironically, wrote an article about this recently for one of my clients, and it sort of depends upon how you define Asia and how you define Europe. But Georgian people absolutely say that they're European. So that Georgian people say we are part of Europe, we are not part of Asia. And for lots of reasons, I actually agree. But yeah, different people put it in different places depending on how you categorize continents. But then some people also say that Europe and Asia aren't separate continents and they're just one giant continent called Eurasia. So this is a conversation for a different time, I think, Gabe. But in short, I don't know.
Yeah, no worries. And I can have a suggestion here if you like so much. And I know a place that can tick all these boxes. It's Madeira, Portugal. Not sure if you've been there. And on top of that, has a big nomad community, probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest right now, even bigger than Chiang Mai and Bali.
Oh,
It developed exponentially after the pandemic. It's such an amazing place. Hikes, mountain biking trails,
okay.
and bunch of other outdoor adventures like canoeing and so on. And going back to the reason why you started this lifestyle and how everything shifted for you, why you think that was the case? Apart from quote unquote getting old and needing some other routines and goals and so on, was something else that's making you taking it slowly?
I think I'm a little bit more cynical than some other digital nomads, or maybe I've just been doing this too long. I don't know. Everything sort of gets boring eventually. Everything gets tiring eventually. And I'm not saying that being a digital nomad is boring because it isn't. It's amazing. But I think if you have a life of perpetual adventure, you know, like every day you wake up, you don't know what's going to happen that day. You don't know where you're going to sleep that night. You don't know what city or town or village you're going to visit that day. That's the way I used to travel. And it was amazing and sometimes still is amazing, but everything gets tiring eventually and you can't do anything forever. And I didn't want to keep doing that forever. I don't know. Also, yes, I think like adventure becomes limited in a way. Like I sometimes say, and a lot of people don't agree with me on this, but for better or worse, in a lot of ways, life is pretty much the same everywhere. So after you've had a certain number of adventures, you sort of think, well, I'm generalizing here, Gabe, but in a way, you're not going to find anything beyond that. And any adventures that you continue to have are going to be quite similar to adventures you've had before. So then you start to try to seek out a different way to have those adventures and a different way to fit those adventures into your life. I'm struggling to articulate this because I'm struggling to understand my own psychology as well. Because if the Paul McDougal of 7 years ago was listening to me today, he'd be thinking, what are you talking about, you boring old man? So even I'm not entirely sure why my logic has changed or why my lifestyle has changed. But I think it's just something to do with everything gets old eventually, everything gets tiring eventually, and everyone needs new things eventually.
And do you see yourself settling down for a longer period than 1 year somewhere? Like you have that favorite place in 50 plus countries, you might have some at least top 3 places that you really enjoy. Maybe Georgia is one of them.
Yeah, Georgia absolutely is one of them. So for 10 months of last year, I lived in Tbilisi, which is the capital of Georgia, and left in October last year. And then I came back to Georgia February this year. And I definitely think that Georgia is a place that I'll keep coming back to. So I wouldn't really want to be here over the winter because it's pretty depressing here in the winter. And lots of the things that are appealing about Georgia, such as like hiking in the mountains and all that sort of stuff, you can't do them in winter because it's too snowy and too cold and the roads aren't accessible. So I wouldn't want to live here full time, but it's definitely a place I can see myself coming back to over and over again because there are so many things that I love about it. Another place is Vietnam. So I used to live in Vietnam for a while, and I'd quite like to live there again. But also, as I get older, I do have more of a compulsion to go back to the UK, where I'm from. If the rest of my life, from now until the day I die, is just shared between the UK, Georgia, Vietnam, and say Thailand, I'd be quite happy with that. That would be quite appealing. But I do think that in the future, not for a while, maybe in 10 years' time, I will stop being a digital nomad and I'll settle down. And even though this might not seem like the most exciting response in the world, I do think eventually I'll live back in the UK full time. Eventually.
Yeah, it's something about the home country. We always tend to go back there, always feel that home. I don't like to call it being homesick or something, but it's something related to going back in a familiar place, which is more familiar than, I don't know, a place that you continue visiting like Georgia. And I have this home feeling when I came back to Bali or I went to Thailand for multiple times and so on. But it's still not the same as going back to Romania, from where I'm from. But in the same time, weather wise, I don't see myself living full time in Romania. It's an interesting topic. But I want to talk as well a bit about your work, about your travel writing, because it's something that looks like a dream job. You love traveling, you love exploring and so on, and you're writing about it. How that fit into place and why you choose that path?
So when I first started writing, I would literally write about anything. So it sounds obvious, but when I first became a writer, I wasn't a writer. So what I used to do back in the day is I would work at home, say for like 6 months, and then I would go traveling for 6 months. So I would earn money at home and then spend that money away from home. And I was repeating that cycle. And I got a little bit tired of that cycle and decided I wanted to make a little bit of money while I was traveling. And I've always been like fairly academic and stuff in school. Like I quite liked essay writing and etc., etc. So I decided I was going on an 8-month trip, and I decided to start advertising myself online as a writer, which I wasn't, but I decided to lie. Sometimes you have to lie, Gabe, to get the things you want. And I went on Freelancer and just applied for really badly paid writing jobs. And at first they were just anything. I would literally write about anything for any amount of money. And then I picked up a couple of little travel writing roles, and then I wrote about a couple of trips I went on. I remember I was in Moldova and I don't even remember what website it was now, but I pitched a story about Moldova to a website. And then just off the back of those 2 or 3 or 4 pieces of travel writing, I thought, oh, wow, like if I could get paid to write about travel while also traveling, wouldn't that be the dream life? And yeah, I just sort of built up from there. I built up a portfolio of travel writing and built up a client base of travel websites that wanted my content. And it just continued from there. But even now, not all of my work is travel writing. About 80% of my work is travel writing. And then the other 20%, weirdly, is I write scripts for YouTubers. So,
Oh, nice.
yeah, so
That's
that's
interesting.
a small amount of that YouTube stuff is travel related, but not much of it is. But yeah, that's how I got into travel writing.
And how do you find these clients?
Now, most of my clients are just repeat clients that I've been working with for a long time, and they like my work, so we continue to work together. Also, as you know, I use LinkedIn a lot, and that's how we got in contact, through LinkedIn. Occasionally now I also get leads from LinkedIn, so I don't reach out to people on LinkedIn, or I very rarely reach out to people on LinkedIn, but sometimes people will see my content and they'll contact me and say, oh, I like the sort of stuff that you write. Would you like to write that stuff for me? But in terms of picking up clients in the past, I've used Upwork a lot. So Upwork is quite good. Word of mouth is good. But also there are writing specific jobs boards. So, jobs boards like Indeed and Monster and blah, 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 where you go and you can find any job in any industry. There are also jobs boards that are specific to writing, where you can find writing jobs and apply for writing jobs. And they're really useful. And I think that's a resource that not many writers know about. One of the best ones is Write Jobs Plus. So WRITE, Jobs Plus. And you have to pay to be on that board, but it's absolutely worth it. I recommend that one. And I also recommend, there's a subreddit called Hire a Writer, and they're quite strict with, they only allow people to post jobs if the pay rate is high enough and if the clients are transparent enough and stuff like that. So they're the 2 jobs boards I would recommend for anyone looking for writing work. There are more, but they're absolutely the best that I know of anyway.
Thanks so much for sharing that. I know that I have a lot of listeners that are writers, so this will be super valuable for them. And you mentioned writing scripts for YouTubers. I think that's a huge one, in my opinion, especially because we all love watching YouTube videos and especially travel related YouTube videos. And we always imagine that they are creating the full content and so on. And it's interesting to see that they actually probably reading from a script.
The ones I write for, it is like, it's not sort of like influencers going about their travels, talking about their travels. It is more like listicles or top 10 videos or deep dives on certain topics. So it is stuff that is clearly scripted, if that makes sense. So I'm not like the voice behind an influencer or anything like that.
Yeah, that would be interesting to create literally a brand and to have a ghost writer behind you when it comes to especially video creation. It's such deep topic in my opinion. And yeah, but apart from that, when it comes to writing, I know that you write something else as well. Can you?
My book, is this?
Not only your book, but I know that you write poems.
I write poems.
I think I found the information about that, like funny poems. Isn't that true?
Wait a minute, is this like some old thing that you found on my Facebook or not?
I check your website.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So I once, I once ran. I've never talked about this in a podcast before. This is almost embarrassing. I once decided for fun to do a project. I can't believe I'm talking about this. I hope no one looks this up. So you know when people do spoken word poetry, like you know when someone will get on stage and they'll do like some really terrible spoken word poetry piece about, I don't know, like the environment or mental health or something, right? And like, yeah, those things are important and it's good to write art about those things, totally. But so many people do like really bad versions of it because they have absolutely no talent but want to pretend that they do anyway. So I started a YouTube channel where I did intentionally bad spoken word poetry about like topical things, but I didn't tell anybody that it was a joke. I just wanted everybody to watch it and think, is this guy joking? Is this guy just terrible? Yeah, like even some of my friends would like send me messages being like, "Hey Paul, are you okay? Are you feeling a bit mentally unwell today? Because I just watched the video on YouTube." But it was a joke, but I didn't tell anybody that it was a joke, Gabe. And now that I'm saying this out loud, I really hope no one searches for it. Yes, that
What's the YouTube handle for?
we're not going there. This could
I,
ruin my reputation, Gabe.
I promise that I won't research that and I won't put it in the show notes.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I've got a feeling you're probably
Joke,
lying, but hey, put it in there if you want to. That's okay.
joke aside, I won't share anything that you don't want. But this is funny because I did my research wrong on Paul, or
No, not at all. Yeah, that is some profound research you've done there. That's quite impressive research. You should become a spy or something.
I thought about it, to be honest. Since I started podcast, I had to dig deep for some insights in one of my guests because sometimes it's so hard to find information online. Surprisingly, we live in 2023 and some people are just ghosts, literally. I'm not joking. Like, I could find about one of my guests literally 3 or 4 paragraphs. I was like, holy cow, is this it? Is I cannot find anything
Did
else?
that person not have like Facebook or LinkedIn or anything?
Nope.
Okay, maybe you wouldn't be a very good spy then, Gabe. I take it back. You shouldn't be a spy.
Probably. Even that I'm pretty good at Google search, but yeah, who knows?
How do you be good at Google? I've never heard anyone call themselves good at Google search before. What are the keys to being good at Google search? Because I thought Google searching was just a thing everybody did and you were neither good nor bad at it.
Yeah, that's a hilarious thing that happened to me, I think 3 or 4 years back. One of my clients, and for a web design business, he hired me because I was good at searching. Literally, like he said to me, you find a solution so fast that I wasn't able to find even that I searched so much for it. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. And after that, I really realized that some people don't know actually how to search. And of course, putting the right queries in and asking the right question can make you find a solution in 5 minutes or 1 hour. And that can make or break a project, or of course, go over budget and stuff. And I know lots of my friends that are developers that are really good at searching on Stack Overflow and other platforms where they can find pieces of code. So yeah, searching, it's quite an underrated skill, to be honest.
All right. I'll get in touch for some hacks, some tips on how I can search more effectively.
Oh, for sure. Happy to share. And going back to writing, when it comes to giving advice to others, I'll challenge you to create a framework for aspiring writers, or even those that are just at the beginning, to be able to land this type of jobs that you do, literally dream jobs. Maybe they don't have a niche at this point. Maybe they have no idea if writing is for them.
Well, I mean, my first advice would be, if you have no experience, to go on something like Upwork or Fiverr. I would ignore freelance. I actually started as a freelancer, but I would ignore freelancer because, well, no, I wouldn't ignore it. Actually, freelancer isn't terrible, but the gigs are just very badly paid. And maybe if you have no experience, then the only thing you can get is freelancer. But if you're already even vaguely experienced in writing, or if you're vaguely confident in your skills as a writer, Upwork and Fiverr are better than freelancer. And I think these websites have a slightly bad reputation, and I understand why, because like the vast majority of clients on these platforms are taking a chance and not paying writers very well for the amount of work that the writers put in. I get that, but sadly, there are many aspiring writers who are all fighting for a relatively small number of jobs. So sometimes things like Upwork and Freelancer and Fiverr are just things that you have to use, even though you'd rather not use them, and even though they're not the best places in the world. So I would recommend people to jump on those platforms. I'd also recommend having a little portfolio. And I think often like aspiring writers are a little bit lazy in this way, and I also was. But unless you can demonstrate that you can write, no one is ever going to hire you. Like, it's just obviously not going to happen. So have a little portfolio that you can share, and that doesn't even have to be a portfolio of work that you've done for anybody, which again is what I did in the beginning. I think my portfolio, and obviously your listeners can't see that I'm saying portfolio in inverted commas with my fingers, quotation marks rather, is because I hadn't written for any clients before. So I wrote 3 pieces of content. One was about a trip that I'd been on somewhere. I don't remember where. It might have been Albania. I have no idea really. One was about a film that I liked, a David Lynch film that I liked, as if I was like some sort of film reviewer going around thinking I'm Mark Commode. And I can't remember what the third one was. But anyway, I made a little portfolio of work, and okay, that work wasn't for a client, but the important part was that it demonstrated that I could write. So a potential client could look at that and go, okay, this guy, he might not have worked for people before, but he can write, and that's what we need him to do. So I'd recommend new writers to do that. I would also recommend checking out writing specific jobs boards, which we've already mentioned. And another thing I would recommend, which is probably not going to surprise you, is to build a brand on LinkedIn, which is something I wish I'd done way, way earlier. Like, I've only been on LinkedIn really for about 7 or 8 months in any serious way. I've had it for years, but I've never used it seriously until about 7 or 8 months ago. And I wish I'd done it way earlier, because it allows you to write in a way that you want to write about anything that you want to write about. And also it just automatically builds a portfolio. Every time you post, you add them to a bank of things that you've written, and that becomes like a portfolio. And also, if you gather enough of a reputation on LinkedIn and enough of a following on LinkedIn, then eventually, sooner or later, people are going to come to you and say, I like the way you write, or I like the things that you're writing about, or I like the style of your writing. Do you want to write for me? So I've lost count of how many tips that was, Gabe, but they would be my collection of tips for new writers who want to write. Also, here's a big thing for you. This doesn't apply to everyone, because like if someone is a medical writer, like obviously you have to treat your writing with like a degree of respect. Like if you're talking about like heart surgery for children, you can't be making light-hearted content, obviously, right? But the vast majority of writing, the vast majority of written content is about like quite inconsequential stuff. Like I write about travel, okay? And like obviously my clients want me to do good work, and obviously I want to do good work for my clients. But ultimately I'm just writing about travel. Like I'm not writing about something like game-changingly important. So have some fun in your writing. I find it quite bizarre how few writers are fun in their content, and how many writers take their writing way too seriously, and how many writers write as if they're writing some like medical journal or something. Not all writing, you're not Charles Dickens. Like, not all writing has to be like super serious and super. I can't even think of the word I'm meant to be a writer and I can't think of a word. All I mean is, don't be afraid to make your writing lighthearted, and to make your writing a little bit funny, and to make your writing a little bit casual, because I think clients and prospective clients appreciate that. And nobody wants to read boring writing, do they? Like, if you're writing
That's
something,
true.
if you're writing something that is meant to be entertaining, you want to be entertained by it. So don't take yourself too seriously.
And how you do that? How do you make your writing more funny, more engaging, bring more life to it?
I don't do this all the time, but one exercise I sometimes use is, no one wants to work all the time. Sometimes you're not in the mood to work, right? And sometimes I sit down at my laptop to write, and I don't want to write because I'm not in the right frame of mind, or I'd rather be outside in the sunshine or whatever. Literally try to entertain yourself. So like, if I'm writing about, I don't know, some bike ride in Scotland, for example, like, how can I write this in a way that would entertain me? How can I make myself laugh in this moment? How can I entertain myself in this moment? How can I jump off on a tangent that will entertain me in this moment? That can be quite helpful. I think another thing that can be quite helpful is to, and I do talk about this quite often on LinkedIn, is to try to make your writing conversational and casual. And I think that often means breaking the norms, the traditional norms of how people think you should write. So say, for example, when you're in school, teachers will tell you that don't start sentences with the word and, or don't start sentences with the word but, or don't start sentences with the word because. But actually, like, okay, if you're writing an essay, maybe stick to those rules. But if you're just writing a piece of online content, don't stick to those rules, because broadly speaking, people like to read content that reads in a conversational way. And if you start sentences with the words and but and because and other words, that reflects how people actually talk in real life. So that can be quite helpful. Using ellipses, like the 3 dots, dot, 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 that can make writing read in a more casual way. Using brackets, I just try my best to write in a way that's quite conversational and quite casual, and in a way that reads as if you've sent. Here's a tip for you. Write in a way that reads as if you're sending an email to a friend. Obviously, like, only to a point. Like, don't like start like throwing around loads of swear words and blah, blah, blah. But you know what I mean? Like, write an article as if you're writing it for your friend to read.
That's a brilliant tip. I mean, I think about writing funny. I was just thinking maybe I should insert a joke here, or maybe I should do that or that, but not actually thinking about the way I actually speak face to face with someone, or as you mentioned, like talking with a friend via email or message or whatever. And you mentioned there's some sort of myth. What do you think is the biggest myth when it comes to writing?
The biggest myth about writing, I would say the biggest myth is that everything does have to be so, like I've already sort of said this, but that everything has to be so serious, and everything has to be so formal, and everything has to be so formulaic. I think that's a myth. I'm not a fan of, I'll be honest, I'm not a fan of Shakespeare because I'm an absolute pleb. But Shakespeare used to make words up. When Shakespeare was writing a play and he didn't have a word that he thought would fit into what he was trying to convey, he would just make a word up. So if Shakespeare can do that, then you can do that. You don't have to be bound by all these, like, oh, this should be this way and this should be that way, and you have to use that piece of punctuation like that. If your work is readable and communicates the message and the tone and the style that you're trying to communicate, then don't be afraid to break the rules.
Speaking of rules, since we're not only connected on LinkedIn, but a lot of our listeners are from there, what do you think about all this formatting that is so popular on LinkedIn for easy scheming, for easy, like personally, I apply it and indeed works, but I feel like sometimes writing for robots, like, what's your take on this?
Yeah. Do you mean how everyone just writes in like really short, brief sentences and really short, brief paragraphs and all that sort of stuff? Yeah.
Yeah. And even when they put listicles, they try, and I try as well, to make it like,
Yeah.
guide the eye and such.
Yeah, I've always been quite a big fan of writing in short sentences and writing in short paragraphs. But I think some people can take it a bit too far. And I think in the past, I've been guilty of taking it too far. I think actually what people also like is variety. Like short sentences and short paragraphs are cool. But if you have 100 short sentences and 100 short paragraphs in a row, then it stops being cool and it stops being entertaining and it stops being readable. So I think you have to change things up. But yeah, in terms of listicles, when you format things in ascending or descending length, that's a thing I've seen people do. And I think, does it work? I don't know. I've never focused on it. Maybe I'm the idiot. Maybe they're the idiots. I don't know. I'm not sure. But it's never a thing I've focused on. Would ascending length of bullet points guide my eye? I'm not sure. Maybe. But
Yeah,
I feel like
that's
every month there's a new like formatting trick that people are playing with on LinkedIn, isn't there? I think as long as you
yeah,
make the work
indeed.
readable and not big blocks of text and not too repetitive, and you're not using too many long sentences and too many big words, because LinkedIn has an international market, I think that's an important thing to consider. I have also heard that the algorithm, we're all slaves to the algorithm, aren't we? How depressing. It's like a terrible episode of Black Mirror. I've heard that the algorithm does favor posts that people look at for a longer time. So say if I posted something and you posted something and someone was to look at both of them and engage with neither of them, but look at yours for 15 seconds and look at mine for 10 seconds, then the algorithm would promote your post more than it promoted my post. I don't know if this is true. It's just a thing that I've heard. So I guess if the formatting makes people read for longer, then that in itself might push your post higher, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good one. And I think I'm not entirely sure, but I think some of the posts that I use, for example, not the real emojis like smiling emoji or something, but I just use the purple squares since it's part of my branding and so on to highlight some bullet points and stuff. And if I use maybe excessively those in some posts, those were performing better, probably because people are spending a lot of time like literally reading those bullet points. I don't know, maybe that's the reason. And continuing with writing before jumping into some interesting discussion about digital nomadism, because I have a question for you on that side on top of my head. I would like to ask you about your book because it's hilarious because you wanted to make me rich with that book. If you
I was trying, Gabe. I just wanted to make you a millionaire. I was offering you an opportunity and you
exactly.
turned it down.
Yeah, I'll never forget how we met. But jokes aside, I would love to hear more about your book, and I'm sure it's full of knowledge and valuable advice. Because at the end of the day, you had a lot of experience when it comes to the digital nomadism.
The reason I wrote it is when I first started taking LinkedIn seriously, as I say, about 7 or 8 months ago, my only intention really was to talk a little bit about travel writing and advertise myself as a travel writer. And if any work came from that, then cool. That was why I started using LinkedIn seriously. But I quite quickly realized that you are talking about digital nomadism and some other people are talking about digital nomadism, but nowhere near as many as I expected. So digital nomadism now is quite trendy and everyone knows what it is and lots of people are doing it and lots of people are starting to do it. So I imagined that LinkedIn would have been super saturated with people talking about it, but I was surprised that wasn't the case. So I spotted a little niche and I thought there aren't many people giving advice about even the basics of digital nomadism. So I wrote a book. It's quite a basic book. There's no illustrations or no fancy cover or anything like that. It's just 50 pages of general advice that falls within a few different categories. But yeah, it's covered like some big things such as visas and tax and all that sort of stuff. But I've also covered a lot of little things because I think surprisingly not always, but often it's the small parts of digital nomadism that intimidate people and stop people from making the leap into becoming a digital nomad. And that's things like, how do I find a long-term place to live? How do I make friends? How do I navigate a bus system in a new city? It's all those smaller things that in isolation might not be too terrifying, but when you add like all 50 of them together, all 100 of them together, suddenly becoming a digital nomad seems really intimidating and really scary. So I just wanted to write a book that addressed the basics. So like I don't know if you have read my book, but if you were to read the book, you would probably look at it and be like, yeah, that's all pretty obvious. But people who've never been a digital nomad before, those things might not be so obvious to them. So Yeah, that's on my LinkedIn page. You can add a link to that in the show notes if you want. And the book is pay what you like, including even free. So people can download it for any price they like. You can take it for free. You can take it for $1,000,000. You can take it for whatever price you want.
That's awesome. And I think you're totally right when it comes to the lack of resources out there. When I started my journey, I literally could not find much. And apart from that, there are so many myths about digital nomads that are not true. People imagine that all digital nomads are either extremely rich and they're able to live anywhere and so on. Others are thinking that you are like homeless people that travel with a backpack from town to town and back for, I don't know, food or whatever. But I love you to tell me what's the biggest myth when it comes to this lifestyle.
Ooh, okay. I think, and again, I'm going to sound so miserable and so cynical, and I don't mean to because I love my life and I love this lifestyle. But if you work full time, and even if you have like one or two hobbies, this lifestyle isn't vastly different to a normal lifestyle. And I think most people who aren't digital nomads imagine, like you say, that this lifestyle is different to what it is. I think most non-digital nomads imagine that the digital nomad lifestyle is like constant adventure and constant variety and constant unexpectedness. I think maybe I've just made a word up. I'm not entirely sure.
Okay, Shakespeare.
Thank you very much. But when you're working full time, this life is not as different to a normal life as most people think. I would be doing that Monday to Friday if I was in Newcastle, the city that I'm from. So yeah, like you do immerse yourself in different cultures and you do experience different cultures and you do get to live in different cities and you do get to explore different landscapes. But 80% of the time, my life is the same here as it would be in England. And I think the biggest myth is that the opposite is true.
I love that you raised the curtain on that, since it's one of the things that I constantly face when it comes to talking with my friends or even clients or people that I met that are not living this lifestyle, maybe are in vacation in the place that I am. And they imagine that we literally travel all the time, explore all the time, adventure all the time. Even that I run my own business as well, and I, in theory, can have a flexible schedule. And sometimes I do. I literally probably work weekends to have a day off or days off during the week to accommodate the weather, for example, or different trips. But 90% of the time, I literally have the same lifestyle as you described. And still, I won't change it for anything at this point, since those weekends and those time offs that I take, I'm exploring basically new places, new countries, and so on, which is amazing.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's not as some people portray it, or quote per quote influencers.
Yeah.
So yeah, everything that you hear with a bit of salt.
It's interesting that you said that because, like, I'll still, like I say, I've been doing this for almost 7 years, but I'll still have conversations now. Like, say, one of my family or one of my friends will call from home and they'll be like, "Oh, so Paul, what have you been doing today in Georgia?" And it's like, it's Wednesday, man. I've been working all day. But one of the biggest challenges is coming to terms with Monday to Friday that your life is pretty normal. Because I think there's even a little voice in my head sometimes, and you'll probably get the same thing. And I think every other digital nomad will get the same thing. There are days when, say, today is a pretty nice day outside, and I'm thinking, man, like, I'm in Georgia, one of my favorite countries on the planet, and I'm just sitting inside all day working. But you have to sit and work. So I think one of the challenges is trying to quiet that voice in your head. You know, that's one of the biggest challenges, like coming to terms with the fact that you can't be having adventures all the time. That's quite a big challenge. Another thing that can be challenging, and I'm getting better at this as I do it longer, but like relationships. I mean, all types of relationships, like romantic relationships, friendships, etc., etc. You'll go to a new city and you'll make friends with someone, and there might be an amazing person, and that's your new best friend for 6 months. But then inevitably you have to leave those people behind and say goodbye to these people. And hopefully you'll see them again one day in the future, but you might not. So letting go of people is quite tough. But then starting again is quite tough. So when you get to a new place, some people travel with friends, some people travel with partners, some people travel with family. But the vast majority of digital nomads, I would say, travel alone. And if you do that, or even if you are traveling with other people, you get to a new place and you've got to start again. You've got to find your community again, find your people again, and make friends again. So both aspects of that are quite tough. Also, life admin can be quite tough, and this is one of the reasons I don't like to move very fast. When you get to a new place, you have to find a new long-term apartment, find your nearest supermarket, work out with the public transport, find your nearest gym, find your nearest yoga studio, whatever, all the things that are important to your daily life. You have to find those things, and that can be surprisingly quite tough, like finding a nice apartment to live in, because also when you're a digital nomad, you work from home, so you want to find an apartment that's nice to live in and nice to work in, and like all that sort of stuff, and that can be quite tough sometimes.
Those are good ones, and especially the second one, that at some point I didn't find it that challenging. I was enjoying travel by myself and so on. But when I literally start to connect with like-minded people and make friends, and I was like, holy shit, I may never see this person again. And lucky enough, with some of them, I literally crossed paths like 4 times. They are also from Romania. We met in Bali. We encountered in Portugal. Then we encountered in Bali again. Then we encountered in Thailand.
Nice.
And was like, holy shit, you guys are following me or something. And yeah, apart from those, literally with the majority of them, I never see them again. And that part is tough. And personally, how I deal with when I don't really find a quote unquote perfect place for me, I literally start to enjoy working from other places like co-working spaces, or trying to not sit in a place that I'm not really comfortable, just sleep and that. But luckily is not often the case, but sometimes can happen. Like literally you don't find that perfect place. You don't find, I don't know, a comfortable place to work from or a good internet connection and so on. But yeah, all those things are valid challenges, and lucky that there are people like you that are telling the truth, not just portraying the nice thing about this lifestyle and the things that attract most people to it. But the reality is just that it's just another way of living life. And if you have your problems, if you have your challenges back home, you'll basically bring it with you. So it's not an escape from normal life.
That is a big thing. I think we all have our mental health struggles and our mental health issues and stuff. And I think a lot of people, and I've been guilty of this in the past, you think, like if I just go start a new life in a new place, then everything's going to be fine. And it's not how your brain works. It's that old saying of wherever you go, you're there. And it's true, right? I think in some ways the adventure and all of that sort of stuff can be good for mental health. But yeah, if you're feeling mentally not perfect, going to live in a new place isn't necessarily going to fix it.
And might even broke it further, since there are new challenges, new learnings and so on. But to ending up in a more positive notes, you promised to share at the beginning and you didn't. A crazy story about hitchhiking.
Ooh, okay.
You didn't promise, but I just made that up. So
Yeah, I have some. One of the ones that sticks in my mind, I actually have a lot to share, but yeah, one of the ones that sticks in my mind is it was actually in Georgia. Anyone listening to this is probably going to think the only country I've ever visited is Georgia. I promise it isn't. It's just a place where I've spent a lot of time. The first time I ever came to Georgia, I was actually close to Kutaisi, the city I'm in now, and there are 3 places I wanted to visit, like 3 historical sites I wanted to visit close to the city, and I wanted to hitchhike between them. So I was standing on the side of the road, put my thumb out, and then a big bus pulled up, and it was a bunch of kids on a field trip. And this sounds like I'm making this up, and I'm absolutely not making this up. They stop and they let me into the coach. Like I'm just like a strange man who doesn't speak the local language, and they just let me join their field trip. And they gave me a packed lunch, and they were visiting exactly the same places that I was visiting. And they just took me on their field trip, and none of them spoke English apart from this one young girl. The kids were maybe 12 or 13 or something like that. I can't remember now. But one of these girls spoke good English, and she was like my translator for the full trip. And they just took me on their entire field trip all day. And then when it was finished, they dropped me back off in Kutaisi. That's probably my favorite hitchhiking memory because it was just so ridiculous.
yeah, indeed, it's so random, and you even had the luck to have someone that speaks English to be able to translate you around. Yeah, that's amazing. And to wrap things up, can you make a short challenge for our listeners to be able to start hitchhiking? I know it's not for everyone. I know that not everyone can do it. And can be risky for some of us. But if someone is into this and want to try this at least once in their lifestyle, what's one thing that they can do in less than one day to be able to achieve this, apart from pointing the finger out? And
Yeah, I was going to say, if you want to hitchhike, the easiest thing to do is just hitchhike. Okay, maybe two things. The first thing, and there's a bit of a disclaimer here because I am a man and it's much easier for men to hitchhike than it is women, right? And I'm completely aware of that. I have hitchhiked with women in the past, friends, girlfriends, my sister even. So my advice is not necessarily going to be the same if you're a solo woman, because obviously for solo women, hitchhiking can be a bit more dangerous. But broadly speaking, like, your life is not a horror movie. Not everybody is trying to kill you, right? So, like, don't be so afraid. Like, not everyone is out there to get you. Don't be so afraid. That's the first tip I would give. Because when I first started hitchhiking, I was quite scared. And now I do it without hesitation at all, like at all. The second tip is it's much, much easier in rural places. So I would say hitchhiking out of a city is super difficult, even for like an experienced hitchhiker like me. It's always super difficult for lots of reasons. Like, city people are usually less friendly. There are endless roads to choose from. People driving in cities are usually staying within the city. They're not leaving the city, all those sorts of things. So the easiest way to start hitchhiking is to go like from one small town to another small town, or one small village to another small village, because the vast majority of the time there's only one road running between those two places. So if you stand anywhere on that road, any car going the direction you're going in is probably going exactly where you're going. So just in terms of planning, it makes it much, much easier. So yeah, they would be and also, like, in rural areas, people are much more likely to help each other out, no matter which country you're in, you know? So yeah, those are my two tips. Do it somewhere rural and don't be scared. Your life is not a movie. But again, I do understand that solo hitchhiking is a vastly different game than it is for solo men.
this was awesome. And please tell our listeners where they can find you. And of course, I'll put all the links in the show notes. But for those listening from a car or something and want to check you out as soon as possible,
my advice would be don't bother. My advice is that the best place to find me is LinkedIn. My name is Paul McDougal and I'm most active on LinkedIn. That's the best place to find me.
Awesome. I'll put that link in the description as well to the ebook. And thank you so much, Paul, for joining me today. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you very much, Gabe. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Make sure to check the show notes where you'll find direct links to the tools and resources mentioned in this episode, and much more. If you enjoyed this podcast, make sure to subscribe to your favorite podcast station to not miss when we drop the next one. We have lots of exciting guests and surprises for you coming up. This is your host, Gabe Marushka, with the Nomad Solopreneur Show. Until next week, pura vida!